Hello and welcome to the Machine Learning Podcast, the podcast about going from idea to delivery with machine learning.
As more people start using AI for projects, two things are clear. It's a rapidly advancing field, and it's tough to navigate. How can you get the best results for your use case? Instead of being subjected to a bunch of buzzword bingo, hear directly from pioneers in the developer and data science space on how they use graph tech to build AI-powered apps. Attend the Dev and ML Talks at Nodes 2023, a free online conference on October 26th featuring some of the brightest minds in tech. Check out the agenda and register today at neo4j.com/nodes. That's NEO, the number 4, j.com/NODES. Your host is Tobias Macey, and today I'm interviewing Matt Turck about his work on the MAD landscape, ML, AI, and data, and the insights he has gained on the ML ecosystem in the process. So, Matt, can you start by introducing yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. As you know, I'm a big fan of your work. So my name is Matt Turck. I am a partner at FirstMark, which is an early stage venture firm based in New York. And over the last 10 or 15 years, I've been heavily focused on the world of data infrastructure, machine learning, and AI.
And do you remember how you first got involved in machine learning?
Yeah, prior to being a VC, I was a co-founder at some point in my career, and I was working on enterprise search and knowledge management, which actually involved a lot of AI, at the time, Bayesian techniques, although at the time saying that you were an AI startup was not quite as cool as it is today.
And so, for context, you've actually appeared recently on my other show, the Data Engineering Podcast, talking about the data infrastructure aspects of the MAD landscape. So I'm not going to dig too deep into kind of what is the MAD landscape and some of the history behind that. So for folks who are interested, I'll add a link back to that episode. But just for the context of this conversation, so people don't have to jump around a bunch, can you just give a bit of an overview about what is the MAD landscape project and some of the story behind how it got started and how it has had kind of a lasting impact over these past several years?
Yeah, it's an annual project I've been working on since 2012. And, it's always one of those big market maps, the purpose of which is to try to make sense of the complexity of the ecosystem. And I try to capture on just one graphic, but also now interactive application, both the worlds of data infrastructure, machine learning infrastructure, but also ML and AI applications. So you can find it on my blog, which is mattturck.com with 3 T's. And the interactive application itself is at mad.firstmark.com, so mad.firstmark.com.
In terms of the ML components of that overall landscape and the ecosystem around ML and AI, I'm curious what you have seen as the kind of broad categories of changes that have happened over that 11-year span from when you first started compiling the landscape to where we are today, where AI has become a topic of conversation for people who aren't even in the industry at all.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting evolution because, as we all know, machine learning and AI heavily depends on data. And especially for a lot of enterprise AI applications, there has been a natural progression towards being able to deploy AI in the enterprise that involved first getting your data house in order. That was Hadoop back in the day, but that's really become a reality with the modern data stack and, the rapid success of cloud data warehouses. So, that was really the big trend of the last few years. And now that a bunch of companies do have their data house in order, with the parallel evolution of all the super exciting stuff that has been happening in deep learning and most recently in generative AI, now AI in the enterprise becomes a possibility. So we're exactly at that inflection point, which is just extraordinarily exciting.
And with AI applications, an interesting aspect of it too is the kind of relative appetites for risk and required accuracy because of the fact that we're not dealing with deterministic processes, but instead probabilistic. I'm curious what you have seen as the general awareness of what that means in terms of kind of risk appetite and actual capabilities and useful applications of these technologies, along with that progression of the capabilities of those underlying models to be able to ratchet up that level of accuracy for different problem domains.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're jumping right into the central question for AI in the enterprise, which is that indeed AI is a predictive kind of technology. And I think people don't always fully understand that. So a lot of the data world has been focused on the core paradigm of business intelligence, which is really understanding the present and the past, where you just use tools that give you information that's going to be correct 100% of the time. When you start getting into predictive technology, which is machine learning and AI, then you find yourself in solutions where AI and ML may get it right 80% of the time, 90% of the time, maybe 95% of the time, but not 100% of the time. So that has all sorts of different implications about how you can deploy AI in the enterprise and what use cases you may want to apply it to. There was a first wave of enterprise AI that really started in 2014, 15, 16 around use cases that were more sort of like numbers based and structured data based. So I'm thinking applications like fraud detection, like churn prediction, that kind of thing. And those are great examples because if you help a company predict churn, if you get it right 80% of the time, it's still a wonderful thing. But if you, and if you get it wrong 20% of the time, then there's no particular issue there. As we get in the thick of that generative AI wave, then there's all sorts of new use cases. But I think the central question is wrapping our minds around, okay, what are the use cases when we can live with AI that is right 80% of the time or 90% of the time? And we can get into what that means. But that's the sort of the framework.
One of the kind of interesting challenges of machine learning and AI in the kind of business and kind of company forming space is that, and in the enterprise, as you were mentioning, is that it's not a deterministic approach to problem solving. It's probabilistic, and there are variances in terms of the level of accuracy that you're able to get. And there have been obviously progressions in terms of the accuracy for different problem domains, sometimes quite drastic. And I'm wondering what you have seen as the impact of the kind of general education and awareness of what those impacts are and the kind of true capabilities and applications for MLAI in terms of the appetite for risk and accuracy requirements in different companies and different industries.
I'm glad you mentioned that because it's actually a very central problem. That's not going to be new news to your audience, who are folks who spend a lot of time thinking about machine learning and AI. But as you think about the sort of proliferation of AI in the enterprise in particular, what you just stated is a surprisingly misunderstood fact. And I think part of it is that people have understood data through the lens of business intelligence. And as we all know, business intelligence is really the ability to look at the past and the present with 100% of certainty. Like, okay, my sales in the Northeast increased by X% through the performance of those two reps. But when it comes to AI, I think it really does take some education for people to understand that it's a predictive technology and that it's going to be correct 80% of the time or 90% of the time or 95%, but certainly not 100%. And therefore, it should be applied to use cases where being right just most of the time, but not 100% of the time, is acceptable, which rolls out all sorts of different use cases. And then even for the use cases that you do apply it to, like accepting that it's not going to be right all the time is important. And I think that's a fundamental aspect is getting a new life, because now we're clearly in that ascending part of the hype cycle around generative AI, where with AI going truly mainstream, now everybody seems to be thinking that AI can do all the things, and ChatGPT in particular being this kind of all around kind of AI that can do multiple things in a highly convincing way. Now clearly conclusion that a lot of people get to is that, okay, AI is going to be able to do all the things for all problems very quickly. So then there's going to be another wave of education that's going to be needed around, okay, what are the actual enterprise use cases where you can have technology powerful, though it may be right only a portion of the time.
Another aspect of the ML and AI opportunity space is in the kind of consumer market and consumer facing applications of it, where a lot of the earlier attempts at machine learning and AI were, as you were saying, predictive in the business context of, I see that I've made this many sales in the past quarter. I predict that I'm going to need to order this much inventory to be able to accommodate future sales. But a lot of the more recent popularity around AI have been in these natural language applications of, hey, look what this fancy thing can do. I can ask it this question and it knows all these other things about X, Y, and Z. Or in kind of software engineering, where it's, I can tell it, build me this application that does X, Y, and Z, and it'll be able to put together something that works, sort of. And I'm wondering what you see as the kind of consumer grade AI opportunities, how that has changed the business kind of appetite for investing in machine learning and AI, and some of the new kind of landscapes that it has opened up in terms of avenues for different types of machine learning applications, different types of data and predictions, and also in that question of risk and accuracy, kind of how that translates into the consumer space as compared to the enterprise space.
Yeah, so I think that's exactly right. I think there is, that very clear moment that's happening now when, a very broad category of population is learning about AI and the power of AI. So, a lot of people say, hey, this is the iPhone moment of AI, and I think that's a good analogy. Just to push the the iPhone analogy a bit further, if you recall, there was when the iPhone came out, there was like this interesting moment when the enterprise was trying to really control people's phones, and part of it was BlackBerry, part of it was just create all sorts of constraint about like how you could do, what you could do with a mobile phone, and then the power of the consumer tool that the iPhone was basically overwhelmed any kind of like resistance, and you had this bring your own phone kind of movement, and over period of time that was pretty short, then the iPhone went from being a consumer tool to also being an enterprise tool. I think there's a little bit of that happening in the enterprise right now, where now people play with ChatGPT, so the expectation that they will be able to do the same thing at work is already there, and that's only going to increase. Like, you don't want to spend all your day, a lot of your time with ChatGPT as a consumer tool, and that's going to answer all your questions, and then you go to work, or you turn on your you start working from home, your work day at home, and then you start using clunky tools that require like all sorts of different interfaces. So I think that's happening. That's creating a very high level of expectation, and I think the enterprise is going to need to adapt to this and evolve. There's certainly a whole avenue of discussion around data tools that you and I and a lot of people listening to this love. There's certainly this interesting trend around, okay, what does that mean in terms of BI tools? Do you need still to be a SQL expert to query them, or do you even need to be like a Tableau Looker expert to do it? Why wouldn't you have a natural language interface that enables you to ask any kind of questions, whether it's simple or complex, and have the data tool return in natural language exactly what you want to know? So there's certainly that, and there's a bunch of companies that are seeing the opportunity and starting to work on this. So I think that's interesting. Sorry, you were asking me about what was
the kind of impact on the kind of the way that AI becoming kind of consumer grade and consumer facing, how that has impacted the list of kind of opportunity spaces for bringing ML and AI to bear on different types of problems, and the way that risk and accuracy need to be considered in that consumer facing space versus how it's thought of in the enterprise. and also the level of kind of education that's necessary as we bring AI and ML into a broader community and into kind of general use. What are some of the kind of responsibilities of the people who are building it to be able to actually provide some of those guardrails and understanding of these are the actual limitations, particularly in that space of ChatGPT is starting to hallucinate again.
So there's certainly another part of the consumerization of AI that creates new use cases in the enterprise. If you use Chat GPT to write an email to your friends, you certainly want to be able to use Chat GPT or the equivalent to create marketing copy or internal communications or like all sorts of different things. So there's certainly all sorts of different enterprise tasks that used to be done a certain way for a very long time that people are going to want and expect to be able to do using those tools. The key difference between most of the consumer use cases and the enterprise use cases is that, a little bit to the earlier point, there's a number of enterprise use cases where you just cannot afford to get it wrong. And therefore, the well-known and well-publicized issue of generative AI hallucination becomes a particular problem. That's particularly true in circumstances where you are customer-facing, where you are real-time, and where not getting it right can yield immediate and serious consequences. So, like simplest example, you don't want your enterprise chatbot to start saying racist things to your customers. So, again, like we are in that ascending phase of the generative AI hype cycle where like everybody's like, okay, I can do all the things. But what I'm seeing in my daily conversations with entrepreneurs, including the founders I work with that actually are in the trenches of deploying some of the things in production in the enterprise is, okay, what do you actually do about the hallucination problem? And it's a very unsolved problem. And that's what is so fascinating about, how quickly this whole generative AI space is evolving. It's like, week by week, you see different lines of thinking, different strategies. It seems that most of the companies trying to deploy generative AI, the enterprise, end up with a combination of different models. So they use GPT-4, Claude a bulk of the problem space, or the interaction, the prompting, and all of the things, and then they combine that with specific models that they have. And typically, those models are trained very specifically on the data that each enterprise has. So it becomes a sort of a ground truth for what is true, what is not true, and they combine all of that. So there's again GPT-4 with which gets fine-tuned on enterprise data, and then separate models, and then they combine them. There's a little bit of a sequence to get to the final result. But all of that is just experiment that's happening literally as we speak. It's just crazy and fun times. But until we truly solve that, we're actually going to be a lot more limited in the actual use cases of generative AI in the enterprise than the current narrative on Twitter and elsewhere would let you believe. It will be great to help build stuff that doesn't matter that much, like marketing copy. It matters, but like it doesn't matter if you get it wrong the first time. I think it will matter a lot for coding. I think that's a particularly sort of juicy problem space where just talking to a bunch of developers, they already use ChatGPT in particular, GPT-4 in their day-to-day coding. So that is super interesting. But then again, for like anything that requires the AI to be right 100% of the time, especially in real time, that's not going to be a possibility until we figure out how to solve that hallucination problem systematically.
There are a few topic areas that I want to explore. One of them is because of the rapid news cycle around these generative AI capabilities in terms of the kind of video generation, image generation, text generation, wondering what kind of an impact that has on the investment market of, VCs wanting to be able to kind of ride this rising wave versus the kind of due diligence that's necessary of understanding what are the actual capabilities and limitations, as you were referring to. And then also, what are some of the ways that you see this generative AI hype maybe occluding some of the other more kind of fundamental applications of ML and AI, or ways that ways that AI and ML are being used in less kind of flashy industries or scenarios?
In terms of the investment in the VC landscape, there's a couple of thoughts. So one, there's absolutely a moment of a gold rush that's happening right now. I think for both the right reasons and arguably sort of the wrong reasons. The wrong reasons being that it's been a pretty dire in the VC and startup world for the last couple of years, and generative AI happens to be the one bright spot. So there's a little bit of pent-up energy from venture capitalists to just go really hard at the one space that seems to be moving. So, arguably wrong or not wrong, but certainly circumstantial. And then there's the right reasons, which is, 100%. There is that really obvious inflection point and really impressive, real-time compounding that seems to be happening where, as we all know, like every 2 days, it's like a crazy new thing that's happening. Last week was AutoGPT. Before that was Baby AGI. And, it's like every week seems to be exceeding the prior week. Now, if you talk to people in the VC world, there is, different schools of thoughts. And I think the reality is everybody's trying to figure it out in real time. There's certainly people that say, hey, there's a little bit of a first mover advantage that still in today's world matter. There's only so many of those fundamental frameworks that are going to matter, or those vector databases or whatever. So you'd better make your bets now because it's going to be too late. And then you have a whole different school of thought that says, well, if you think of the, big winners of the prior waves, very often they were latecomers, the latecomers. The obvious example being Google, which was search engine number 27 or whatever the number was, or Facebook, that was certainly not the first social network. So, everybody's trying to figure it out in real time. As a second thought, very speculative, but I was actually just sort of jokingly, but also not so jokingly, tweeting the other day that the structure of companies, especially early stage companies today and going forward, was going to be different. So I was basically saying, hey, standard startup team now should be CEO, CTO, 2 engineers, and GitHub Copilot. And then I updated that tweet just a couple of days ago saying, well, on second thoughts, actually, no, the default team should just be CEO and AutoGPT. And look, it's Twitter, so it's meant to be a thought experiment in real time rather than profound and definitely true statements. But I think there is some interesting food for thought behind that, and particularly since we're talking about VC in terms of what that means in terms of like how you not just build but also finance those companies. And if you truly end up in a situation where you can have much smaller teams, do those teams need that much money to get started? Just the way when the cloud came up, suddenly you did not need to spend $5 million just to have some servers in your back room, and you could get started with AWS for like $100,000 or whatever. I think that is something comparable to this is happening in AI now. So look, I don't know, but I think that's really interesting. And if that was truly going to be the case, I think that has pretty massive implications in terms of the overall structure of the venture capital industry, which is coming from years of raising very large funds. My sense is that like as always, the reality will be somewhere in between, but I think that's something directionally interesting. And seen from the entrepreneur perspective, and I'm being even more provocative here, but it used to be that you would need to be hyper focused on one thing, and you could only do one thing at a time because you had finite resources in terms of time, money, and people. But in a context where you can get a lot more done, certainly doing more with AI when you have working on a very specific problem and you super focus on it, that will never not be true. But could you also build companies where you do multiple things at the same time? And you're a seed company and you try multiple avenues in your path to get to product market fit. So you actually launch 4 products, not 4 MVPs, not just one MVP, and then you kill the 3 that don't work and you work with the one that do work. So I really think we're in the possibly early stages of a brave new world where a lot of the ways we've been building and financing company may be changing quite a bit.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting aspect. And there's another question buried in there that I want to get to, but there are a couple of leading questions that we need to go through first. And the first one is we've been talking a lot about kind of generative AI because that's the one that has all of the interest right now. But in terms of the overall landscape of machine learning and AI, I'm curious if you can just talk to the coarse grained divisions that you see in terms of the different categories in the landscape and kind of some of the ways that that manifest that are not necessarily even tangentially related to generative AI.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we're like in that moment where generative AI has brought the whole AI field mainstream. So a lot of people seem to be discovering AI all of a sudden, but the reality is that this whole current wave of AI really started in 2012 when the power of deep learning became very apparent. So there's actually been a whole generation of companies that have been building and deploying AI in the enterprise at scale. I'm an investor in one of them, a company called Dataiku, which has become the global market leader for enterprise AI currently. And certainly Dataiku is being very active on generative AI now, but it's also reached very significant scale. I think that's public. Over 200 million in revenue, and across the world, and like hundreds and hundreds of customers doing AI for today's enterprise problems, as opposed to necessarily the new use cases that are being created by generative AI. And those are some of the things I was alluding to, like churn prediction, fraud prediction, supply chain optimization. So the whole world of what, if you want, the sort of structured data kind of AI. Now there's been a whole wave which is now getting accelerated by generative AI, but of use cases in the enterprise around unstructured data. So we're talking about computer vision, audio recognition for things like manufacturing, surveillance, and security, and all the things which companies like Dataiku and others have been handling. But now generative AI is accelerating this whole like new world of different use cases, and I suspect that companies ultimately will end up doing both. That's certainly the path that a company like Dataiku is going down. If you think of companies like Databricks, which have become over the years less of an AI company and more of a data infrastructure company, but now they're sort of like going back to building data infrastructure with Dolly. So I think all enterprise AI companies will end up being that combination of like, hey, we do AI on structured data, we do AI on unstructured data, we enable you to leverage outside models, we enable you to host your own models. So we, all forms of AI will be sort of like unified through those companies.
And then for the companies that are building the ML and AI infrastructure for being able to train and build and deploy and monitor and fine tune these models, what are some of the challenges that they are facing in terms of the engineering capabilities, customer acquisition, figuring out, because of the velocity of the AI space, what are the actual problems that need to be solved as new problems get discovered?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That's exactly the problem. It's this whole generation of companies emerging that are calling themselves LLM ops, which is the new take on ML ops. As we all know, the world of ML ops over the last few years has been both exciting but also challenging. Exciting because again the world of enterprise AI has been accelerating dramatically over the last few years, even before generative AI, and therefore there's been demand and a very clear market need for ops tools and platforms. At the same time, ML ops became very crowded very quickly because a bunch of smart founders saw the opportunity, and then a bunch of VCs were excited by the companies. As a result, you have just like too many ML ops companies. So now you add on a new layer, which is like all the LLM ops companies, and a lot of people have seen how many generative AI companies that were in the most recent class at YC, which was partly something to sort of like joke about, but also really interesting in terms of trend. But the question for LLM ops companies and challenges is exactly what you're describing, which is like every week is different. So nobody knew what AutoGPT, recursive agents were 2 weeks ago. I mean, of course, the concept itself is not completely new, but like the implementation of it is new. So what does that mean? Is that what you need to support? And what will the world look like in 2 weeks from now? So there's that. And then there's the other part, which is, a lot of people talk about generative AI, especially in the enterprise. But as always, the hype is a little ahead of the reality of it, and I think there's a lot of people that are trying to ponder what they need to do and figure out what that means for them, and trying to get smart and educated about the space. So I think the demand for LLM ops at this stage is very new and experimental and untested. So look, I mean, it's great. Like every new wave sees a group of new infrastructure companies, and great companies will be built, and and a lot of other companies will turn out to be less necessary. But you seeing certainly the emergence of a stack there, which is nascent but interesting, and some of it is vector databases. So there's a whole space of the Pinecones of the world that are already commanding valuations that are reportedly well ahead of the current reality of the business, but that's fine. And then you have emerging frameworks like LangChain that like everybody sort of joke that however many years ago you wanted to sound smart, you would say, hey, blockchain, and now like today you want to sound smart, so you say, hey, LangChain, like even if you don't necessarily know what LangChain means. But that's certainly coming up in all sorts of kind of conversations. But like beyond the joke, like there's certainly new tools and new platforms that are emerging, and it's both challenging but also a lot of fun.
And so now circling back to the question that I wanted to lead into when we were discussing kind of the impact that these generative models will have on accelerating business capabilities, is that for companies where the model is the business, there is a different kind of barrier to entry where they need to have access to enough data and compute resources to be able to build and train the models. And I'm wondering how you see companies addressing that challenge, particularly if they are in an even remotely adjacent space to some of the big tech kind of incumbents who already have all of the engineering talent, troves of data, top tier kind of machine learning, compute clusters. Kind of what do you see as the challenges that these earlier stage companies are running up against as they try to build models as the core component of their business or as a component of their business against these kind of existing moats?
There's two different cases here. There's a discussion around the providers of models and a discussion around the users of models. So from a provider of model standpoint, if your business is to provide a model as a service, then I do think that it's going to be increasingly hard to provide something that's truly general. Unless you have access to massive amounts of capital. I think that phase where you saw not just OpenAI, but also the Anthropics and the Adepts, come up on the surface. I think I don't know how many more of these there's going to be appetite to fund because those are very big ticket investments where like every round needs to be starting at like 40, 50, 60. $1 million, and I don't know how much the market will sustain. So look, don't want to say that game has been played because famous last words and the next big thing comes, and there were some people that thought that DeepMind had killed the game back in the day, so that was certainly not the case. But at least for this current market phase, like I don't know how many more. I think there's plenty of opportunities to create and offer as a service industry-specific models, and that we just starting to scratch the surface of those. I thought that the Bloomberg Bloomberg GPT, I believe it was called, was a particularly interesting example. So, Bloomberg being a company that has access to tons of financial data, created their own engine there. My sense is that there'll be a bunch of those, for healthcare and for transportation and for, sub-segments and all the things where of companies that do have access to data will be able to create models and offer those as a service. So that's sort of the provider side of things. And then from a user side of things, I actually don't think, especially in the enterprise, that the OpenAI and GPTs of the world are going to be the final state of affairs and that all enterprise AI applications will just be a wrapper on top of that one big model. I actually think it's going to go, at least in part, pretty much the opposite way, where in lieu of or possibly in addition to those very large models, you're going to have a whole zoo of smaller models. I actually think that open source is going to play an incredibly important role there. And the reason why there'll be a bunch of models will be partly cost, partly not being completely dependent on one company like OpenAI, platform risk kind of thing. But also you'll need to be able to heavily customize those things to your specific needs. And arguably, if what you want to do is something that's going to automatically respond to your employee inquiries, and in the US, the fact that GPT-4 speaks Polish and Indonesian doesn't matter that much, and you actually want something that's much narrower. So obviously, this concept of distillation and taking very large models and turning them into smaller, more relevant models. But I think there's some directionally multiple small models, again, in lieu of or in parallel with the large models is pretty much what the future is going to look like at this stage, I would think.
Yeah, I actually just recently read a Wired article talking about Sam Altman saying that they're hitting the point of diminishing returns. We're just throwing more data at the problem isn't going to produce the GPT-5, and that we're actually at a point where we need to start thinking about what are the different architectural aspects of these models that we need to be considering. And I definitely think that the open source models is a really interesting space, and I'm wondering too whether we're starting to get to the point where we need to actually have these more narrowly scoped models and then have a kind of meta model on top to manage orchestration across those different subcomponents, and that maybe that's the next approach versus just this one monolithic model that does everything within a particular problem domain.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, that's the LLM ops space that we started talking about, which I think is going to need to exist despite the challenges that we mentioned. But that's certainly one aspect of it. Certainly, chains of models, hence the whole like LangChain thing, multi-prompting, recursive prompting, observability, and then all the stuff that's coming from the more traditional MLOps world. To such extent, there is such a thing of model fairness and bias and deployment in production. Like all of this is going to need to exist in the generative AI world just as much as in other forms of AI. And then just building on the first part of your point and the Sam Altman thing, there's that big question in research as well, which may or may not be in the scope of this conversation, but indeed that's the debate that has been raging. Are you going to throw just more data at those models and get better results, or do you need other forms of AI to be added to this? And it's like the whole question around the return of like symbolic AI or good old fashioned AI. And helping AI understand concepts and introduce concepts of reasoning, because as we all know right now, as amazing as it is, ChatGPT and others like have just no idea what's going on and just produce the next most likely word given a prior sentence. So it works magically, but like there's just no reasoning whatsoever.
Yeah, so many different interesting conversations to be had on that. And digging a bit more into the question of open source models, with things like ChatGPT holding the limelight and being kind of sucking up a lot of the oxygen in the room and being a proprietary model, I'm curious what you see as the most interesting movements in the space of open source models and some of the future development or areas that you would like to see more activity.
Yeah, I think open source is hugely important. not for just like business reasons and technical reasons, but also most like society level kind of reasons. So, the reasons why OpenAI doesn't open up their models are well known and publicized. There's debate there, but certainly there's rationale for saying that there's some risk involved there. But we do need open source as a counterbalance to whatever power is going to be accumulated by OpenAI, and even further power accumulated by the big tech companies. So I think that's really important. That's certainly why companies like Hugging Face are going to be immensely important to the ecosystem, even more so than they are now, as the home of open source ML and AI. And then there's a whole separate discussion about, okay, what does it actually mean to be open source when it comes to the world of AI? Is that the model, the weights, the algorithms, the data, and all the things? So there's all sort of variation and sort of shades of gray around this. But there's certainly an argument for like radical open sourcing, and equally a very obvious argument against that, because completely open source model also opened the door to just also for ill-intentioned people to be leveraging that, which leads to the whole discussion around regulation and all the things, which is a whole separate kind of worms kind of discussion, but absolutely essential.
Yeah, definitely brings up shades of the kind of cryptography export controls aspects, as well as in terms of the open source space. What is the OSI equivalent for machine learning models, and what are some of the licensing considerations? Like, can you use Apache 2 on a model? What does that even mean?
Yep, that's exactly right.
And so, in terms of your experience of working in this space, investing in companies, talking to entrepreneurs, what are some of the most interesting or innovative or unexpected ways that you're seeing ML and AI used in business and social contexts?
Yeah, we're really in that phase where everybody's trying to apply AI to like all things. But I think we're just at the beginning of like that massive wave of experimentation. Look, there's certainly the applying AI to the data world, which we'll talk about, that I find interesting. There's AI applied to just complete product creation, website creation, that I find fascinating, where you can create an entire app just through commands. I think that just has like absolutely profound consequences, and not just on the no-code world, but in general. If you think of the proliferation of software in the world as having been gated by the scarcity of talent and the really really small number of people in the world that know how to build the things, it's like a whole new world that opens up if you can just build software product for everything and everybody can do it. And just like you're asking me, like unexpected use cases of generative AI and all the things. So like I'm very much out of that world, but it's been just fun to hear some of my colleagues and younger friends talk about using ChatGPT in a dating context and how it enables them to basically scale their efforts. So as opposed to conversing with however, whatever the number is, like dozens of people across multiple apps at any point in time, doing it manually. Now they just use ChatGPT to create conversations, which of course is hilarious when you think that people on the other side are probably or will soon enough do the same. So you'll have basically ChatGPT talk to ChatGPT or whatever system instances chatting to one another. And like I'm curious to see what comes on the other side of it, whether you get better matches or worse matches. But it's I was, having not spent a lot of time thinking about it, I thought that was a really funny and surprising use case.
Yeah, or we just end up with another version of, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Jexy.
Yes,
with the
yes.
with the jealous AI in your phone taking control of your life.
Yes. All of this is 100% going to happen, by the way. And again, like I don't know if that's beyond the scope of this podcast, but like all the her thing, and we were talking about Hugging Face a minute ago, but the part of the reason why Hugging Face is called Hugging Face is that the first version of the company before it pivoted to the current model was to be like a her, like her the movie, like her like kind of AI friend to whom you would speak and build a relationship with, which was, a really cool idea, arguably a bit strange, but certainly ahead of its time of where the technology was at the time. But the technology is here now, and that's absolutely going to be a thing. And humans developing feelings for AIs, or feeling that AIs understand them better than any human being would be. That's not 20 years away, and that's like next year, or even possibly right now. So it's this, like it's what we all experience, sort of this incredible acceleration of the future, where what felt like decades away is just happening right now.
Yeah, it also brings up a whole other interesting conversation that we don't probably have the time or the expertise for, of security in an ML context, where rather than just being network or application security, we're now having to think about security in terms of combating malicious AIs on behalf of somebody, or like flagging potentially malicious AI activity for somebody maybe interacting on social media and kind of saying, this isn't actually what you think it is.
Yeah. And so I think that's a problem that we're going to need to resolve as a society very quickly. The proliferation of like deepfakes and all the things for security reasons or others. So yes, if you can spin up some website in a second, you can create phishing attacks like you never were before. Used to be sadly, because I'm active on social media, I have a lot of sort of impersonators and like fake accounts, fake Matt Turck accounts on, especially on Instagram, where I'm not active, but anyway. And people have been building remarkably complex schemes for like crypto fraud, where they would have very precise website, like a workflow and all the things, and it's just extraordinarily hard to figure out that it's a scam unless you pay really a lot of attention. And so now with AI, like if you can build those websites in a second, you can like spin up like thousands of them, completely customized to every single person, and target, and that's incredibly scary. And then there's a whole discussion around. I don't know, people say, well, maybe we should tag deepfakes to make it clear there are deepfakes. And I was chatting the other day with Victoria Parbelli, who's the CEO of Synthesia, which is a fascinating generative AI company that I work with and I'm on the board of. And we were sort of joking about Web3 and crypto applications. But he was saying, and I thought there was some real insight here, that instead of trying to identify all the deepfakes, maybe what we should identify are the real images and songs, and because those are going to be very soon much fewer. The Web3 crypto joke was like, maybe actually that would be a real use case for a blockchain, where each actual real image or again songs or creation would have a unique sort of digital ID that could be verified against the blockchain. But I think there's something really interesting here around okay, well, let's maybe focus on defining the truth as opposed to defining what is not true.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting and scary proposition. And if we're going to use the blockchain, we definitely have to work on figuring out how to scale it, both in terms of actual throughput and the kind of environmental impacts as well.
Yeah, well, that's a different podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So many different interesting kind of rabbit holes to dive down anywhere you look. And so, in terms of your experience of working on the MAD landscape and digging into this space of ML and AI over the years, what are the most interesting or unexpected or challenging lessons that you've learned personally?
So there's a couple of lessons. So one is a little bit what we said earlier, which is that as an entrepreneur, you need to truly be thoughtful about applying AI to use cases where AI can succeed. And I have a little bit of a mental model around this, which is like a 3x3 kind of matrix, where on one end of the spectrum you would have use cases where the AI needs to be right 100% of the time, or the product needs to be right by 100% of the time. And then that needs to be true in real time. You need to have that 100% correct answer in real time. and three, it's a high stakes kind of environment. So like an example of this would be a product that would operate in the context of an ER room, where it would be like a life or death situation where you need to make a real-time decision. Or self-driving, I guess, would be another example of this. So that's one of the spectrum, and then the other end of the spectrum, and that's kind of like 3x3. Mental model would be use cases where, yeah, if you get it right, that's great, but if you don't, nobody dies. And or two, you can you don't need to do that in real time. So basically, that leaves time for a human to look at the results, before you need to provide whatever the final output is. And yeah, it's low stakes, and nobody dies if you get it wrong. So you don't need to get it wrong all the time. It's done in real time, and if you do get it wrong, then it's not a life or death kind of situation. So in that mental model, the best use cases of AI tend to be towards that latter end of the spectrum. And there's a lot of them, and we talked about some of them around creating content in the enterprise. That's not real time, that's low stakes, and that's okay if you don't get it 100% of the time. But answering a customer request in real time with something that's super important, that's much more towards the former. And using generative AI in particular with the hallucination problem to do this becomes trickier. So that's one first half of the answer to the question. That's what I've learned. Just make sure that you apply AI capabilities to the right problem. And the second aspect of this is that still to this day, I think there is a little bit of misconception around how much of a solved problem AI truly is. And for all the APIs and all the tools and all the things, I think people, depending on the use case, of course, but people misappreciate to which extent AI is still a little bit of a deep tech kind of endeavor, especially if you're a true AI company. And by true AI company, I mean that you do a lot of model work. So either you create your model, or you train a model, or you fine tune or significantly customize an existing model. As soon as you start doing that, then you need people who are able to do this. There's not that many people around who have those kind of capabilities, and there's going to be experimentation. And so the company ends up looking like a deep tech company where the first X period of time, whether that's a year or 2 years or 3 years, depending on what you're trying to do, that's not going to be your super agile SaaS MVP, screw it, ship it kind of thing. It's going to be much more like, okay, heads down, let's train the AI and build the product. And that has all sorts of different consequences in terms of funding, in terms of expectation, in terms of pace of development, and all the things. And look, we're sort of joking earlier in this conversation around, okay, maybe the companies of the future will be just auto GPT or whatever comes next, and one person. But I think the reality as of today is very much not that. The reality as of today is very much need a team of experts and take time to get it right. Again, if you do model work, like if you're a sort of an applied ML company that doesn't do any model work and basically is a wrapper on top of OpenAI, GPT model or whatever, then ultimately you're very much a SaaS company, in my opinion, as opposed to an AI company. And you have the pros and cons of a SaaS company, but you certainly have a level of velocity that's different from those kind of like deep tech AI companies.
Yeah, and also in terms of the generative space, it'll be interesting to see once we get to the point where the output of that generation is other models, and we're actually just using generative AI to build more AIs. Which I know that we're probably there in some edge cases, but once that becomes the mainstream, that'll be an interesting inflection point as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think we are in the toy part of the cycle where we all get super excited about whatever is coming out, and it's all magnified by or accelerated by Twitter. and other social media. But the reality is like all those frameworks are extremely early and not working. But yeah, I mean, given the exponential pace and the compounding, like all of this is going to go from the toy phase to reality very quickly.
I think we've probably already addressed a bit the question of when ML and AI is the wrong choice for businesses. I don't know if you have anything to add to that before we go to the next question.
Yeah, I mean, just that businesses should be careful, and I think they are. You know, in all my conversations, I think people want to use generative AI, but are in the learning phase. But yeah, you know, as per the above, yeah, the reality is that right now, for a bunch of use cases, we're just not there in terms of generative AI being ready for the enterprise. So people should somehow resist getting completely caught in the excitement. You know, certainly staying on top and you know, fully acknowledging it's wonderful, but pausing a little bit before truly trying to deploy any of this in any kind of particularly high stakes way, as you know, as we were just discussing.
As you continue to explore this space and figure out what are the possibilities, what are the risks, what are the pitfalls, what are the areas of ML and AI that you're paying closest attention to in your own work?
Yeah, all of the above. I think you know, while wanting to be cautious and having gone through hype cycles, look, I'm like everybody else. I'm just super excited about what's going on. So I you know, have this very simple classification of companies, because the question of like what is an AI company comes up all the time. So I the other day came up with just like a very simple categorization, you know, which I don't mean to be like a definitive statement or anything, but more the sort of like mental model. But I'm excited in all three categories. So like one is you know, AI companies, and by AI companies I mean companies that you know, play with work closely with models, whether they build them, fine tune them, or you know, customize them, or whatever. Two, applied ML companies, which is the category we were mentioning earlier, which in my opinion are more SaaS companies, but basically companies that sit on top of somebody else's model. And three, companies that create tools and frameworks, and those are infrastructure companies. So you end up with AI companies, applied AI companies, or AI application companies, and then AI infrastructure companies. And I think there's certainly a moment right now where great companies are being built in all three of those categories. And as an investor, I'm certainly very actively looking at all of this. But I'm looking at them differently with different use cases, right? Different criteria. For the first category of AI companies, I pay particular attention to, okay, do those people have a very deep bench of ML and AI talent that can be truly innovating at the model level? For the second category, which is AI applications, I'm more thinking about defensibility. Can they build something that is, you know, meaty and thick enough on top of somebody else's model that they can be interesting companies in the long term? And I'm thinking of collaboration. I'm thinking of like workflow, but again, more SaaS-y kind of things as opposed to AI. And then for the third category of infrastructure companies, I'm thinking about the needs of tomorrow, and whether those companies are addressing them, and whether they can go through being whatever little tool they are by definition at the beginning to something that feels more like an AI infrastructure platform doing multiple things. Is there enough blue ocean for those companies to go through that journey, and then being the place where people will build, especially enterprise generative AI companies going forward?
Are there any other aspects of your work on the MAD landscape and the overall ecosystem around ML and AI that we didn't discuss yet that you'd like to cover before we close out the show?
No, it's just like I need AI to update this AI landscape, because you know, it's like every minute, like I'm sure during this conversation while we were recording this, so there's been like two major breakthroughs in AI that were announced. So just like you know, keeping track of stuff is just remarkably challenging. You know, and I have this fantasy, which of course will never happen, is just like taking, you know, just a week to like of doing nothing else but just like consume all the AI newsletters and the AI podcasts, I guess, like this one. And you know, I would feel so much more on top of things. But it's just look, I love it. I've been in this space for a very long time, and people ask me often, well, how do you feel about it? Because now there's like a bunch of tourists that are sort of waltzing in and claiming deep expertise, and they haven't really done the work. And like, look, I mean, that's a little bit of that, but like ultimately, who cares? And it's it's perfectly fair, and like people just go seek the heat to wherever it is. But my sort of a deeper sort of reaction is that look, I'm super happy. It's so fun. It's so exciting. It's such a moment, and I actually don't see enough people in the general AI ecosystem like truly celebrating this. Like, there's a lot of debate, and I got back and forth, and like some beefs, and some people like disagreeing. But it's we're living at this exact moment through an incredible period of time, and like we should all be super thrilled and passionate, and just be grateful for it.
Well, for anybody who wants to get in touch with you and follow along with the work that you're doing, I'll have you add your preferred contact information to the show notes. And as the final question, I'd like to get your perspective on what you see as being the biggest barrier to adoption for machine learning today.
Well, I don't want to repeat some of what I said above, but I think at this stage, for enterprise application, hallucination, as we discussed, is probably the biggest problem. Like, the stuff needs to work, right, for being truly deployed in the enterprise, and we're not quite there yet. So unfortunately, that's a less sort of sexy thing to talk about, and you probably get less likes on Twitter if you focus on that too much. But I think that's the heart of the problem right now, and I'm very curious. I know a lot of very smart people working on that exact problem right now. And I'm curious to see if that's something that just disappears overnight, or whether that ends up being quite sticky. So we'll see.
All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time today to join me and share your perspectives on the ML and AI ecosystem. I appreciate the work that you've been doing on the MAD landscape over the years. It's great to be able to have those snapshots and your opinions on what this all means in terms of the ways that we can think about those broad categories. So appreciate all the time and energy that you and your team are putting into that. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Tobias, for having me. And, if and when we do this again in the future, I'd be curious specifically for the AI world, how different everything will be from the conversation we had today. It's just fascinating.
Absolutely. And are you going to be training ChatGPT to generate the MAD landscape for you?
Yes. Well, I already have I was already joking the other day. I have this synthesia-powered avatar. And I was saying that I made like a fake grain reveal, where I was saying, well, for the last few months, my AI avatar has been sitting on all my boards and doing all my Zoom meetings while I was kite surfing. So, joke for now, but I don't know. We'll see in a couple of years what ends up being true or not true.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks again, and have a good rest of your day.
All right, thanks, Tobias.
Thank you for listening, and don't forget to check out our other shows, the Data Engineering Podcast, which covers the latest in modern data management, and Podcast.init, which covers the Python language, its community, and the innovative ways it is being used. You can visit the site at themachinelearningpodcast.com to subscribe to the show, sign up for the mailing list, and read the show notes. And if you've learned something or tried out a project from the show, then tell us about it. Email hosts at themachinelearningpodcast.com with your story. To help other people find the show, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts and tell your friends and coworkers.